Hey, welcome to Purple and Bold, part of the DNR Media Daily News Record podcast channel. Be sure to check out our other shows on here, Postscript, and some other things that come through the feed. But today we're talking JMU sports, as we always do on Purple and Bold. I'm Shane Metlin here with Katie Harper, your JMU beat reporters for the Daily News Record, and we're going to preview JMU's college football playoff game. It's almost still hard to even believe we're saying that. JMU's college football playoff game against Oregon. We're going to dive deep into a preview of Dukes versus Ducks here in a few minutes. Before we do, we can hit briefly on everything else going on JMU sports wise. Basketball season continues to roll. Actually, we're knocking this podcast out before Katie goes to one last football press conference here in Harrisonburg before she and everybody else travels to Eugene. I'm driving to Norfolk tonight for JMU basketball. So there's a lot going on as Sun Belt Conference play starts in basketball, and we'll dive heavily into that in the coming weeks. Beyond that, thought we'd quickly chat a little bit about a story from the New York Times, The Athletic, about the financial disparities between JMU and Oregon. I think it turned a few heads for a variety of reasons, one being how much money Oregon has to spend, which is not surprising given their status in the Big Ten, having Nike as a primary booster and everything else. But the discussion I've been seeing a lot online here before I came in here that I kind of wanted to address was the report from that article that JMU had 4 men's basketball players making more from revenue share than anyone on the football team. And I think that came as a surprise to a lot of people. Maybe didn't surprise me as much. What about you, Katie?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't 100% sure. Someone had reached out asking, and I'm not gonna lie, I haven't looked too much at the basketball numbers recently because I've been a little busy on the football front. But even just talking to you before we started recording, yeah, it makes sense. That report being accurate when you look at roster size, how much money the programs get, and things of that nature.
Yeah, I will say I've tried to dig into it a little bit, and JMU does not want no school honestly wants to really start putting out their numbers as far as what individual players are making, even exactly what they're paying their total revenue share if they're not at the max like most of the Power 4 conferences. It's really just they want to keep it a secret because if you're JMU, you don't necessarily want App State to know exactly what you're spending because you're going after the same players and things like that. And the negotiations are going on behind the scenes. So that's been tough to get real exact numbers. I will say it didn't surprise me quite as much as I think it did a lot of people that there are basketball players making that from revenue share. I think part of that is JMU, the whole everything school thing. Obviously, football takes a lot of priorities, but if you want to be competitive in mid-major basketball, and in Virginia, that means you want to be competitive with the Atlantic 10 schools that don't have football, you're going to have to step up your financial commitment for basketball if you want to be on the level of VCU or George Mason or some of these other schools around here that you want to consider your peers in basketball. So I think that's probably a big reason why the market is where it is for basketball, even at the mid-major level. And football, we hear so much about the star players. We hear, what Manning's making at Texas, and it's a ton of money and everything. And a lot of that comes from NIL and revenue share. But when you start breaking it down, 100 guys on a roster, even if you have $20 million, there's not a whole lot of people making huge amounts of money if your quarterback and your left tackle and your star running back and your star defensive player are all making multi-millions. I don't think it's surprising that JMU doesn't have anybody making a ton of money football-wise through rev share exclusively. I think a lot of those guys probably have some pretty solid NIL deals too, where they're getting a share of different things they do through social media and other things.
Yeah, it's I think the roster size is kind of the key point that you just made, and maybe gets lost on some people. That is a That's a big driving factor to it, is just making sure that, yeah, you can make one player happy by giving him a lot of money if he's your star quarterback, but then you really are kind of gambling it all on the rest of your team. And how good can your team be if only one guy is getting the money and happy with that, if that makes sense. But it's a balance thing, I think, for sure. And obviously it's still in such early stages for so many people doing this and getting the finances out there, that it, maybe it is something that starts to, change a little bit as the revenue sharing becomes a little bit more understood and normal and not fresh and new. But yeah, that one, yeah, I wouldn't say it was necessarily too surprising to see the basketball players maybe making more, even if it's, the school like JMU that has the longstanding success in football, so more so than men's basketball right now.
And I do also think like the coming years are probably going to be more telling as far as like what JMU's strategy is, because let's be honest, they're still working on generating revenue outside of the student fees, which was the other like big online discussion. We won't dive back into that today, but they are working on generating other kinds of revenue that they can use towards revenue sharing. The Duke Club numbers are way up. The sponsorship numbers are way up. But that really won't start to show until the next year or two when they put together a new roster. And let's also think about who JMU's star players are this year. Like, I don't think there was a huge bidding war for Wayne Knight in the offseason. Like, I mean, let's just be honest. Nobody expected him to be an All-American running back. And you got a quarterback who's coming off an ACL injury where there was question marks. I don't know what kind of offers he was getting outside of JMU. Other guys on the team, like we knew Trent Hendrick, we knew Jacob Thomas. Those were really good players. But I don't know like what they were, how they were viewed as far as like potential Power 4 players outside of this JMU program. I think part of the reason JMU got a bargain on their coach because like they knew like it was a place they could win. I think they probably get a bargain on some of the other people in the program too, including players.
Yeah, and I think it's been a kind of a common talking point for some of these players is, they wanted to go somewhere where they could win. You think of some of these guys that transferred in and they hadn't done a lot of winning at their previous stops. I was listening to the Pat and Mo show featuring Dave Riggert the other day, and Morgan Suarez said it on the show too, where, he was coming from an FAU program that, he didn't have a conference championship ring. There weren't a lot of winning seasons down there. So for a lot of these guys, yeah, they are probably willing to take maybe a discount just because, they want to have an opportunity of winning a conference championship or having an opportunity like they're going to have this weekend at Oregon.
Yeah, and there's just, there's only 60 some starting spots in the Power 4 at each position. So, and there's a lot more than 60 some good players in the country. Some guys are going to be winding up at places like JMU that are really good players and they just missed out on the money. I mean, to be perfectly honest about it. So I don't find it quite that surprising. I think also, things like donations from the collective and things like that probably went more towards NIL type things in previous years and leading up to this year than the actual revenue sharing. So I will be very curious to try to like dig out and find out more exactly about how exactly JMU is distributing what money they do have. But yeah, I don't think it's necessarily a red flag if you find out that there's a handful of basketball players making more than football players or any sign of what JMU's investment to football is.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just so the listeners know too, we have asked for exact numbers. When we sat down
Yeah.
with Matt Rowan and Cliff White at the beginning of the year, we did ask for numbers in terms of revenue sharing. And yeah, it's one of those that they, like you mentioned earlier, they're not really rushing to give out those numbers yet, just because of it, there is a little bit of an advantage to them to keep it private.
Yeah, and what the Athletic did end up getting through their public record request, which I'll admit I hadn't done recently to get updated information there. Even that like was redacted as far as a lot of details, including like names of players and things like that. So yeah, that's something that they guard as closely as they can. And whether we agree with it or not, like try to call that, something that's protected because they are students. So it would be kind of a legal fight that I don't know, the DNR may or may not have the money to make that fight if we really wanted to try to like push for exact contract details on all the athletes. Speaking of those athletes, we've heard a lot from JMU coaches, players, Oregon coaches and players about this first round college football playoff game coming up in Eugene on Saturday night. Katie, just your first initial take after going through almost an entire week's worth of media. Like I said, there's still another press conference after we record this, but you've heard from both sides now at this point. What's just your initial reaction to the mindset of both teams?
Yeah, I think Oregon is very much heading into this game. They know, that people expect Oregon to kind of, dominate this game, but they've been very complimentary of JMU. Their defensive coordinator yesterday referred to Wayne Knight as an NFL player who could play at any conference and be a good running back. So they've been very complimentary of what JMU is capable of, both on offense and on defense. And then for the JMU side of things, I think these guys really are embracing kind of that underdog tag that they've been given. It's something that, I've said to a few other people on radio shows that this isn't a program that's used to being the underdog, especially over the last decade. They go into a lot of these games favored to win. So the fact that they're, the line is favoring Oregon by about 3 scores heading into Saturday, that's a uncharted territory for JMU. And I think they kind of enjoy being this underdog. I can't remember now if I've listened to so many people talk. I can't remember if it was Jacob Thomas or Trent Hendrick said that they think that they play better when they are embracing that mindset. Colin Hitchler said yesterday that a lot of these guys truly have a chip on their shoulder, whether it comes from, recruiting out of high school, recruiting out of the transfer portal. They feel like maybe they were overlooked at times, and that's how they're heading into this game. So I think there's a lot of belief both from Oregon and from JMU that, this could be a team that wins.
Yeah. When you look at the particular matchups on the field, obviously, Oregon has done what they've done, 11-1, going through the Big Ten, not making it to the Big Ten championship game, but thanks to a loss to an Indiana team we're relatively familiar with. But obviously a very successful team, a very successful program that's been kind of in the spot before. This is not new to their players. And we talk about JMU. I always go back. This is something really from the CAA days, but it's starting to become true a little bit in the Sun Belt too. Is that JMU is on a national, and they make the national stage like this, whether it be the NCAA tournament, the College World Series. Anytime they're like kind of on the national stage, it's like JMU's David, and they're always like looked at as Goliath to their peers, though, in the CAA or the Sun Belt and everything. So I think it's always like kind of an interesting dichotomy that like all of a sudden, like you said, a team that's not used to being viewed as an underdog in their day-to-day lives gets to take on that role this week. But what is it about the matchup with Oregon, other than Oregon's from the Big Ten, that particularly makes JMU the underdog?
I mean, a lot of it is just that. I mean, it's you look at Oregon's quarterback in Dante Moore and how talented he is. And I mean, the questions were being asked this week of like, oh, he's an NFL draft prospect. And that question made Hitchler laugh of, yeah, he's just a prospect. He's not like a, possibly a top 5 pick or anything like that. So it's been that when you look at that, obviously there are reasons to believe why JMU is this underdog, and the size maybe favors Oregon. The stadium noise is obviously going to favor Oregon, and that is not a place that you just teams go in and win, unless obviously like Indiana did it this year. But that is a hard place to win, regardless of if you're Big Ten, SEC, Sun Belt. Like that has allowed different kind of stadium environments. So you look at all of those different elements, and they all when they're stacked up together, it seems like it does swing in favor of, Oregon having quite a bit of an advantage heading into this weekend. But there are some matchups I'm like anybody, curious to watch, especially if you're looking at the weather report right now. If that holds true, I'm curious to see how Wayne Knight handles going up against, you know, probably the biggest defense really that they faced all year. Obviously, Louisville had a good defensive line, and that's been heavily talked about all year. But I'm curious to see if JMU does have to rely on the run game as much, how Wayne Knight and Alonzo Barnett can handle that kind of pressure.
Yeah, and you talk about Jamie's offense. Obviously, the defense has been the consistent strength of this team. Jamie's offense has at times been not super impressive, and at other times, like team that can like quickly put up 30 points in a quarter. What do you expect offensively from JMU against a defense that's better than say a Troy or some other teams that JMU's had mixed success against? Will clearly be probably the best defense they played since Louisville, and maybe the best defense they played all year. Like, what kind of offense do you expect if they can get the running? Let's say if they can establish a running game, do you think they're going to be able to also get the passing game going?
I think they're going to have to be able to get the passing game going, especially when you look at the performance that JMU had in the Sun Belt Championship game. I don't think that's a performance that you can, replicate against Oregon. You're not going to have Wayne Knight rushing for over 200 yards in the game and get by with a win when you have under 100 yards in the passing game. Like, these receivers need to catch some passes this weekend. And, if you look at Oregon's defense, the secondary is on the younger side, especially if you look at corner. But even, I think it was Dean Kennedy who talked about it. It may have been Landon Ellis too, but saying, yes, maybe you look at these position players in the secondary and they are quote unquote younger guys. They don't play that way though. There's a reason they're starting at Oregon and they're very, very good and they approach it with a veteran mindset. But if you're JMU and you're Alonzo Barnett, you need to test those down the field balls and maybe even early and try and get a Nick DeGennaro or a Landon Ellis involved early in the game to help maybe avoid Oregon just stacking the box, which is, it's something from Oregon's perspective. They talked about that they know that they cannot just try and stop Wayne Knight and Alonzo Barnett, because the second they focus only on stopping Wayne Knight, that is when Alonzo Barnett can maybe hurt you and throw the deep ball. And Dan Lanning talked about it during his press conference that he doesn't think that Alonzo Barnett gets enough credit for what he is able to do when it comes to hitting his targets deep. And so if JMU wants to, keep this a close one, wants to pull off the upset, that passing game, it has to be there. And the drop balls that we're seeing against Troy, those can't happen this weekend.
Yeah, the drops were definitely an issue there in the cold weather. I want to say last week, but it seems like it's going back 2 weeks now for the Sun Belt Championship game. I think hopefully if you're a JMU fan, that's something that's kind of like in the past, that it was maybe the weather related thing when it came to the Sun Belt Championship game. I also feel like the offense at times, like when it's a game that the coaching staff really feels like they should win and can win conservatively, it seems like maybe they go that route. And I feel like that was possibly the case, given the weather, given everything else against Troy. I think that was probably the case down at at Georgia State this year, which is not a impressive offensive performance. But this is a coaching staff that will dial up some, interesting trick plays and things like that. They will throw it deep at times. They will do some things that you can say they're conservative at times, but there's some times where they're absolutely the opposite of conservative. I would have to think you pull out all the stops in this one, and we're going to see some things that maybe we haven't seen much of this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to that North Carolina game last year where I don't know going into it if anybody thought, well, one, I don't think anybody realized maybe the spiral that North Carolina was about to go on and with its season. But I also don't think anybody really expected JMU to, one, win that game, and then two, win it in the way that it did. And so you think back at all of those plays that they ran, and you haven't seen that this year. You haven't seen JMU need to bring out some of these trick plays other than, the fake punts against Georgia State, which, still didn't result in points in that game. So you want that to maybe change this if you need to use it this weekend. But even thinking of last year throughout the season, how many times JMU went for 2 after a touchdown. They haven't done it this year. And so you would have to imagine that with a lot of players and similar personnel on this roster, that is something that they are capable of doing against Oregon, or at least attempting to do in order to get some points on the board.
Yeah. And one question we're going to get answered one way or the other in this game is really just where JMU stacks up talent level wise. I've been asked this repeatedly here recently about, just how much more talented Oregon is. And my honest answer is I don't know. Like, if you go back to 2023, I knew that was a really good JMU team. In hindsight, though, we can look and think, wow, that team had all these all Big Ten, all American players on it. That team was just absolutely loaded. Yeah, that team could have competed in a New Year's Six bowl game. But that's hindsight. Like, so when people ask me now, like, my honest answer is I don't know. We won't know until we see them play, or we won't know until we see them a couple of years from now and see where they end up and what they've done in their careers, just how good JMU is. And if they do stack up to a team like Oregon, let's say that they do, though, fairly well, and that there's not a huge talent gap. The one thing that would probably concern me most if I was a JMU fan is that Oregon is a team that has not made a ton of mistakes this year. You look, they don't commit a lot of penalties. They don't turn the ball over a lot. Dante Moore's only got 6 interceptions. They haven't fumbled a ton. And I would think if you're JMU, you've got to get some of those types of plays and some hidden yardage and things to have a chance to win this game.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing, is you need to make someone make a mistake on Oregon's team. And if that's in a critical part on the field or critical part in the game, that mistake needs to come for JMU. Like, they need to force that mistake because, like you said, Oregon isn't going to make it on their own, almost certainly. Like, it is going to be a forced mistake if it comes. And for JMU, I know Colin Hitchler has talked about it throughout the season that the guys on the defensive side of the ball maybe aren't the happiest with some of their margins and turnover margins, and they haven't gotten as many interceptions as they would like. And Hitchler has said that for some reason, sometimes those interceptions just don't come. Like, the guys can be in the right place at all the time, and they just don't come when they need them most. You've seen that those start to change in the last couple of games for JMU, that the interceptions have started to pick up. When you look at a player like Justin Eaglin, he has really started to come into his own, especially in terms of getting some turnovers. And then DJ Barksdale, I think at times has really shown when he can be in the right place at the right time to get an interception. So if you're a JMU fan, you should be sitting here hoping that trend of the interceptions finally starting to fall in JMU's favor is something that continues this week. That said, though, when you look at the offensive side of the ball, Barnett has had some interceptions in recent weeks. So if you're a JMU fan, you need your defense to get them and force the mistakes while Barnett is protecting the football and not giving it up, especially if it's in, JMU's side of the field.
Yeah, because, one of those turnovers, I think, they have an interception relatively early against Troy, and I don't think anybody's worried on the JMU sideline at all. And in this kind of game, if you have an interception that maybe kills a drive or, puts you in a bad spot on the opposite side of the field, giving the ball up, like, then maybe the doubt starts to creep into your head if you're JMU in a game like this, where I don't think they've had doubt in their minds, like, at all this season, especially since Alonzo Barnett came in as the clear-cut quarterback option for this team. I feel like they felt like they were going to win every game no matter what, and a mistake like that was something they could overcome and not something that was really going to get to them. You do wonder how they're going to handle the moment if things break poorly early on.
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes to what Bob Chesney, we've asked him a few times over the last couple of weeks when Barnett has thrown interceptions, kind of how Alonzo reacts to it. And it's always that he is very calm. He kind of just goes right to the sidelines. And I think some of it does stem from the fact that I think Barnett just kind of expects the defense to do what it does and get the ball back to the offense fairly easily. But from everything Bob Chesney has said, is that there is no change in Alonzo Barnett if he throws an interception. He is stoic and he is calm and he goes to the iPad, figures out what went wrong, and fixes it. And so you would hope, and obviously people have seen the video that I posted of him talking about growing up as an Oregon fan. So obviously this is maybe a bit of a surreal moment for him to go and be playing at Oregon. But I think at the same time, from what we've seen from Barnett over the last, year and a half, it takes a lot to rattle him. And so if you're a JMU fan, you would want to see that again this weekend, even given the stakes of who JMU is playing.
Yeah, and let's be true too. You mentioned before the receivers have got to make catches in this game and not have the drops. And some of the interceptions have been on Alonzo. Some of them have not. Some of them have been off the hands of receivers, or maybe a little bit off target, but not one that should have like bounced off and wound up being an interception. So I think it's a little bit twofold as far as like taking care of the ball when it comes to JMU's side of things. And like we said, like, feels like somebody like a Jacob Thomas might be due for his pick. That, he's been in position to make some this year and hasn't really like hauled it in, or, somebody with a strip sack or something that, we've seen them come close to making that play this year and not quite do it. That's something that I think it's really going to take JMU to, one, build some momentum in this game, and maybe start making Oregon play tight and wonder like, oh, what did we get ourselves into with this the team necessarily we were expecting? And two, just gain the confidence and keep the confidence that I think is already there, but could be a fragile thing if you go there and all of a sudden you're down by a couple scores.
Yeah, I'm so curious to see how JMU's defense stacks up against Oregon, because we've seen this lights out defensive performance against like a second half team against ODU and Texas State. You've seen them go a month long where they're pitching shutouts in the second half. So I'm very, very curious to see how this defense handles being challenged, probably the most it has been since that Louisville game. Maybe you can even say when they were playing ODU, that was a challenge, especially when you look at how ODU finished the season with Colton Joseph at quarterback. But it's going to be a big challenge, and the first challenge that they've had in a while. So for me, I am very, very curious to see how this defense can put some pressure on some stars that starts with a guy like Dante Moore.
Yeah, and I do find it amusing at times when you see some of the score predictions that might be like, 63-10, things like that. Like, have you noticed that people making these predictions, have you noticed that JMU has not given up more than 4 touchdowns in a game this year?
That is why I'm struggling. Like, I have been asked multiple times to give my score prediction, and I want to just say I am naturally the worst at score predictions, because I start just going in my head of thinking like, oh, well, it could be this, but it could be this, but what if this happens and it could be this? Like, I hate giving a definite answer of like, this is what I think the score is going to be. I will say, I want to say, oh gosh, maybe it was I can't remember what game it was. I was like 3 points off of the right score. Like, I had it down to like so close to being the exact score, and I was just a little angry that JMU didn't add a field goal to make my score prediction right. But I'm really bad at it. But I have looked at some of these. I'm like, I just can't imagine JMU's defense giving up 63 points. And a lot of that is because I've watched them for the last 2 years, and that just doesn't happen. Like, that is not the brand of JMU's defense. And I understand that it's, JMU hasn't played an Oregon caliber team, but I can't put myself in a position where I'm sitting in a press box watching this team give up 63 points.
Yeah, I think if JMU's offense can move the ball enough to give the defense adequate rest, if JMU's offense isn't like giving defensive points to Oregon, if we're not seeing, pick sixes or short fields, things like that, I don't necessarily see Oregon putting up that ungodly number of points. I'm not saying they won't, score 35 or 42 or something like that. But it's hard to picture them like completely running away unless we see things happen in the other phases of the game, with special teams points, defensive points, things like that. then JMU could be in some deep trouble, especially if they're not keeping that defense off the field long enough to get some rest.
Yeah, like I think that's the better way to phrase it too. It's like I can't see JMU's defense giving up 63 points. Yeah, like you said, if it's coming off of defensive scores for Oregon or they're, returning kicks and punts for touchdown, yeah, maybe there is a possibility then that weird things can happen and can get ugly, but yeah, JMU's defense alone, if it, like you said, given time to rest, I don't think 63 points or even 4 scores is a friendly assessment from what this defense has done this year.
Yeah, and then it just all comes back to what we've talked about before, is that running game that JMU has had so much success with, even when maybe they've struggled otherwise. If if you can get Wayne Knight, Joby Mallory getting you some yards, Alonzo knowing when to keep it, things like that, and if you can do it on the ground and get enough from the passing game, I think that puts JMU in position to make this an entertaining game. Because I really think that's just kind of the key, is like you can't have the defense out there for 45 minutes of a 60-minute game and expect them to produce the way they have. But some time of possession or some timely turnovers for the JMU side of things, I really do think there's a possibility this ends up being a more competitive game than a lot of people are giving them credit for.
Yeah, I would say that's a fair assessment. Like as you can imagine, and as our listeners can imagine, the two of us have watched so much JMU football this year. So I just, 60, like some of the lines, like one of the reasons I hate score predictions too is because like I think back to like last year's college football playoff where you have an Ohio State playing a Tennessee in the first round, and you think, well, okay, it's Big Ten versus SEC. This shouldn't be a blowout, and then it is a blowout, and you're like, that's why I hate score predictions, because I'm like, this is on paper, Oregon versus JMU, maybe to some people should be a blowout. But yeah, I revert back to what my dad always told me growing up: is there's a reason they play the game.
Yeah. Like he says, predicting scores can be so tough. Like this one might end up being 35-14 and covering the 21-point spread and not feel like a blowout for all of it. Or it may feel like it was and have the similar type of score. Who knows like what it would be. Like you look back, not to completely, because I was about to wrap this up, but like, so many people have talked recently about JMU losing to Louisville by 2 scores. Nobody who watched that game is saying they lost by 2 touchdowns. Like that was a close game throughout, and JMU like very well could have made it look better. They just went ahead and punched it in the last second, but they didn't really care at that point. It's yeah. So the score itself, very interesting if you put any money on this game, but very difficult to try to predict exactly how it's going to be. Or if that's even going to be representative of how competitive the game ends up being on either side. Before we wrap this up, final thoughts before you go talk to Bob Chesney one more time before everybody heads to Oregon.
This week, man, it has felt like a sprint, and we're only on Wednesday. But yeah. What a time! What a time to cover James Madison football, because college football playoff, absurd, wild, crazy, and I'll be in Eugene, and I still can't believe that.
Yeah, let's shout out Chris Brooks, the sports information director for JMU football, because he told us this the day of the selection. He's like, yeah, it seems like it's good a long way away from game time, but like we're going to be doing all this stuff, and then it's going to be game week, and then we're going to be there. And it's like he was right, because I can't think of a 2 weeks that's gone faster than this one, because not only is football, like I said, there's basketball and lots of other stuff going on around JMU, and we'll dive more into that once this college football playoff run is over for JMU. But in the meantime, you've been listening once again to the Purple and Bold podcast from DNR Media. Please like, subscribe, follow, whatever is the appropriate thing on your podcast app. That'll help us out. And we appreciate you tuning in.